I never thought I'd become rich from being kind. That's not why I did it. When I married Robert 12 years ago, I had no idea what I was really signing up for. Sure, I knew about Eleanor, his widowed mother who'd started showing early signs of cognitive decline. But I didn't know that within months of our wedding, Robert's job would suddenly require extensive travel, leaving me as her primary caretaker. And I certainly never imagined that on the day of her funeral, surrounded by relatives who had barely visited once, I would discover that she had left her entire fortune to me, the daughter-in-law who had bathed her, fed her, and held her hand through the darkest nights of dementia. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Sarah Mitchell. 12 years ago, I was Sarah Collins, a 29-year-old physical therapist with her own small practice, a downtown apartment, and dreams that extended beyond the suburbs of Boston. I met Robert at a friend's dinner party. He was charming, successful, and seemed genuinely interested in my work helping stroke patients regain their independence. On our third date, he mentioned his mother. "She's having some memory issues," he said, stirring his coffee. "Nothing too serious yet. Forgetting appointments, misplacing things. The doctor says it's mild cognitive impairment. Might develop into something more, might not." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. My own grandfather had suffered from Alzheimer's. That must be hard. "Are you an only child?" "Yes." His face clouded. "My father died when I was in college. It's just been Mom and me since then." 6 months later, we were engaged. Another 6 months and we were married in a small ceremony at Robert's family home, a beautiful colonial in Wellesley with manicured gardens and a view of the lake. Eleanor was there, of course, elegant in pale blue silk, her silver hair swept into a chignon. She hugged me after the ceremony, her perfume, something expensive and floral, enveloping me. "Welcome to the family, dear," she whispered. "Robert's made an excellent choice." I remember thinking how lucky I was to have a mother-in-law who actually seemed to like me. 2 months after the wedding, Robert came home with news. "I've been offered a promotion," he said, his eyes bright with excitement. "International accounts. It's what I've been working toward for years." "That's wonderful." I hugged him, genuinely happy for his success. "What exactly will you be doing?" "Managing client relationships across Europe and Asia. It means a lot of travel, though." He hesitated. "Sometimes weeks at a time." I felt a small knot form in my stomach. "How often is sometimes?" "At least 2 weeks out of every month. Maybe more, especially at first." The knot tightened. "What about your mother?" Robert's smile faltered slightly. "Well, she's still managing on her own. The housekeeper comes 3 times a week. And you'll be there, of course." "Of course," I echoed, already feeling the weight of the unspoken expectation. Within 6 months, it became clear that Eleanor could no longer live alone. Her mild cognitive impairment had progressed to early-stage dementia. She left burners on, wandered outside in her nightgown, and once called Robert in a panic because she couldn't recognize her own home. "We need to hire full-time help," I told Robert during one of his brief stays at home. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Those agencies charge a fortune, and we don't know who they'll send. Mom wouldn't want strangers in her house." "Then what do you suggest?" I asked, already sensing where this was heading. "Why don't we move in with her? The house is plenty big. You work flexible hours. Between you and Mrs. Peterson, the housekeeper, we can manage." I stared at him, trying to process what he was asking. "Robert, I have my practice. I can't be a full-time caregiver." "You wouldn't be. Mrs. Peterson would handle the daytime hours when you're working. You just need to be there evenings and nights." He took my hands. "Sarah, please. It's my mother." And so we moved into the Wellesley house, and I began the slow dissolution of my private practice, reducing my client load to accommodate my new responsibilities. Robert assured me it would be temporary, just until Eleanor stabilized or until he could arrange his work schedule to be home more. Neither of those things happened. Instead, Eleanor's condition worsened, and Robert's trips grew longer and more frequent. I found myself learning how to manage medications, handle incontinence, and calm a terrified woman who sometimes recognized me, and sometimes accused me of breaking into her home. One evening, about a year after we'd moved in, I called Robert in his hotel room in Frankfurt. "She had a bad day," I said, my voice cracking with exhaustion. She tried to hit Mrs. Peterson and kept calling for your father. I had to give her the anxiety medication. Robert sighed. I'm sorry. Look, I know this is hard, but you're so much better at handling her than anyone else would be. She trusts you. She doesn't even know who I am half the time, I replied, trying to keep the bitterness from my voice. Robert, I need help. Real help. Not just Mrs. Peterson for a few hours. We've talked about this. Professional care is expensive, I know. But your mother has money, doesn't she? This house alone must be worth a couple million. There was a long pause. It's complicated, Sarah. My father set up some trusts. The money isn't exactly accessible for this kind of thing. Later, I would understand the lie in those words. But at the time, I simply felt defeated. When are you coming home? I asked instead. That's actually why I called earlier. The Milan deal is taking longer than expected. I won't be back next week as planned. Probably another 2 weeks, maybe 3. I closed my eyes, swallowing the words that threatened to spill out. Accusations of abandonment, of using me as free labor, of choosing his career over everything else. Sarah? Are you there? Yes, I said flatly. I'm here. I'm always here, Robert. The next morning I made a decision. If Robert wouldn't hire help, I would, on my terms. I called an old colleague who had a younger sister in nursing school. Does Jenna need part-time work? Something flexible around her classes. And that's how Jenna Adams entered our lives, 22, bright-eyed, and unfazed by Eleanor's outbursts. I paid her from my own dwindling savings, not telling Robert until she'd already been working with us for several weeks. You hired someone without discussing it with me? He demanded during our weekly phone call. I needed help and you weren't offering solutions, I replied calmly. Jenna's wonderful with your mother. Eleanor likes her. And how exactly are we paying for this Wonder Woman? I am. From my savings. Sarah, that's not sustainable. Neither was what I was doing before. I took a deep breath. Robert, when was the last time you spent more than 3 consecutive days with your mother? Silence. I've been doing this for nearly 2 years now. I've cut my practice down to just 8 hours a week. I haven't had a full night's sleep in months. I need this. He relented grudgingly, but refused to adjust our finances to accommodate Jenna's salary. It's your choice, so it should come from your money, he said. Eventually, when my savings began to run low, I had to reduce Jenna's hours and take on more of the burden myself again. And so the years passed. Eleanor declined steadily, moving from early to middle to late stage dementia. Robert's career flourished, his trips abroad multiplied, and his time at home dwindled. I became an expert in dementia care, learning through necessity and heartbreak how to manage sundowning, how to reconnect with someone who was slowly disappearing, how to find patience when I had none left. There were beautiful moments amidst the hardship. Eleanor, on her more lucid days, would sometimes look at me with perfect clarity and say, "You're a good daughter, Sarah. Better than I deserved." Or she would reach for my hand while we watched television and hold it with surprising strength. Once she even remembered my birthday, presenting me with a small box that contained a pair of pearl earrings. "These were my mother's," she said. "I want you to have them." Robert, when informed of this gift, frowned. She shouldn't be giving away family heirlooms when she's not in her right mind. She knew exactly what she was doing, I defended, but I put the earrings away, too hurt by his reaction to wear them. By year 5, Eleanor needed assistance with all basic activities, eating, dressing, bathing. I had given up my practice entirely by then, unable to balance both responsibilities any longer. Robert and I existed in parallel universes, his filled with international business meetings and hotel rooms, mine confined to the walls of his mother's home and the endless routine of caregiving. "You could visit more," I said during one of our increasingly rare arguments. "She asks about you." "What's the point?" he replied, not meeting my eyes. "She doesn't know who I am anymore." "That's not true. She has good days." "Well, they never seem to coincide with when I'm home." He straightened his tie, preparing to leave for the airport again. "You're better at this than I am, Sarah. She responds to you." I wanted to tell him that his mother responded to presence, to patience, to the simple act of showing up day after day, that she might recognize him more if he were around more. But I held my tongue, too tired to fight a battle I knew I couldn't win. By year 8, I had virtually no life outside of caregiving. My friends had gradually stopped calling, tired of my cancellations and preoccupation with Eleanor's needs. My parents, who lived in Arizona, visited occasionally but couldn't understand why I had sacrificed my career and independence for a mother-in-law who could no longer recognize me. "This isn't what you signed up for," my mother said during one visit. "Robert has abandoned you with his mother. It's not right." "I can't just leave her," I replied. "Why not? He has. He's living his life while you're putting yours on hold indefinitely." I had no answer that didn't sound like martyrdom or foolishness, even to my own ears. By year 10, I was 41 years old with no job, no income of my own, and a husband who felt more like an occasional visitor than a partner. Eleanor was now completely bedridden, unable to speak except in single words or sounds. Feeding her, changing her, turning her to prevent bed sores, these had become the pillars of my existence. And yet, somehow, I had found a strange peace in the routine, in the quiet moments when I sat beside her bed reading aloud from her favorite books, or brushed her now thin white hair, or applied lotion to her papery skin. I played music from her youth, Glenn Miller, Benny Goodman, and sometimes her fingers would tap along, a ghost of rhythm remembered by a body that had outlived its mind. It was during this period that I discovered the letters. I was searching for Eleanor's birth certificate. Robert needed it for some financial paperwork and, as usual, had delegated the task to me, when I found a small locked box in the back of her closet. The key was taped to the bottom, a surprisingly careless security measure for a woman who had once been so meticulous. Inside were dozens of letters, neatly bundled and tied with faded ribbon. They were love letters spanning decades from a man named Thomas. Not Robert's father, whose name was James, but someone else. Someone who wrote with passion and longing about a life they might have had together if circumstances had been different. "My dearest Eleanor," one began, "dated just 3 years before I met Robert. Another year passes, and still I dream of a world where you chose differently. Where you chose us." I sat on the closet floor, surrounded by these fragments of a secret life, feeling like an intruder but unable to stop reading. The letters revealed a love affair that had begun before Eleanor's marriage and had continued, with intervals of separation, throughout her life with James and even after his death. The most recent letter was dated just months before Eleanor's diagnosis. "My love, I understand your decision to end things between us. Your concern for Robert's inheritance is admirable, if misguided. He is a grown man successful in his own right. Would he really begrudge his mother happiness in her final years? I would have married you without a penny to your name. It was never about the money. It was always about you, only you. I will respect your wishes and not contact you again, but know that my door remains open, as does my heart. Always, Thomas." I reread the line about Robert's inheritance several times, a cold feeling spreading through my chest. What had Eleanor meant? What money was she protecting for Robert? The next day, when Jenna came for her shift, I drove to the small law office in downtown Wellesley where I knew Eleanor had done her estate planning. The elderly receptionist recognized me immediately. "Mrs. Mitchell, how lovely to see you. How is Eleanor doing?" "About the same," I replied with the standard answer I gave to casual inquiries. "Actually, I was hoping to speak with Mr. Hoffman if he's available. There are some questions about Eleanor's care that I need to address." It wasn't entirely a lie. I did have questions, just not the kind I was implying. Harold Hoffman had been Eleanor's attorney for over 30 years. He greeted me warmly, ushering me into an office that smelled of leather and old books. "What can I do for you, Sarah? Is there a problem with Eleanor's care?" I hesitated, then decided on directness. "Mr. Hoffman, I found some letters recently that mentioned Eleanor having concerns about Robert's inheritance. The thing is, Robert has always told me that his mother's estate is tied up in trusts that can't be accessed for her care. Is that accurate?" Hoffman's bushy eyebrows rose. "Tied up in trusts? No, that's not accurate at all. Eleanor has a substantial estate, the house, investments, some real estate holdings. All quite liquid if necessary." He frowned. "Has there been a problem with financing her care?" My heart was pounding now. So there would be no issue with hiring additional help? Or even moving her to a specialized facility if needed? None whatsoever. In fact, He leaned forward, lowering his voice slightly. Eleanor made provision specifically for her care in her later years. She anticipated her condition might worsen and set aside funds accordingly. He looked genuinely puzzled. Has Robert not discussed this with you? No, I said quietly. He hasn't. I drove home in a fog of betrayal and rage. All those years of struggle, of begging Robert for help, of depleting my own savings to hire Jenna. And all along there had been money available. Money that Robert had deliberately kept me from accessing, forcing me to shoulder the burden of his mother's care while he built his career and spent less and less time at home. When he called that night from Singapore, I couldn't bring myself to confront him. The revelation was too fresh, the betrayal too raw. I needed time to think, to plan. How's Mom? He asked, his standard opening question. The same, I replied, my standard answer. And you? How are you holding up? I almost laughed at the absurdity of his concern, now that I knew the truth. I'm fine, Robert. Everything's fine. But it wasn't fine. Nothing was fine. And over the next few weeks, as I continued to care for Eleanor with the same diligence I always had, I began to formulate a plan. Not for revenge, I was too exhausted for revenge, but for justice. For myself and strangely for Eleanor too, whose wishes for her own care had been ignored by the son she had sacrificed so much to protect. I consulted with Mr. Hoffman again, this time being fully transparent about what I knew and what I wanted to do. To my surprise, he was supportive. Eleanor always spoke very highly of you, Sarah, he said. She was concerned about how her condition would affect you. That's partly why she made the arrangements she did. What arrangements? I asked. He smiled sadly. I'm not at liberty to discuss her will while she's still living. But I can tell you that Eleanor was no fool, even as her mind began to fail. She saw things clearly, perhaps more clearly than those closest to her. 2 years later, when Eleanor was in the final stages of her illness, I received a call from the care facility where she now lived. A beautiful place with gardens and music therapy and staff who knew how to make her final days comfortable. I had moved her there 6 months earlier, over Robert's strenuous objections. It's too expensive, he had argued. Actually, it's not, I replied calmly. I've spoken with your mother's attorney. The funds are available, as they always have been. The look on his face, shock followed by something like fear, told me everything I needed to know about his deception. The call from the facility came at 3 in the morning. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm afraid your mother-in-law has taken a turn. The doctor doesn't think she'll last through the night. I'll be right there, I said, already reaching for my clothes. Robert was in London. I left him a message, then drove through the dark, empty streets to be with Eleanor in her final hours. By the time I arrived, she was unconscious, her breathing shallow and labored. I sat beside her bed, holding her fragile hand, and whispered the things I hadn't been able to say before. I forgive you for not standing up to Robert. I forgive you for letting him use me. And I thank you for the gift of these years because they were a gift, Eleanor. They taught me who I am, what I'm capable of. They taught me strength I didn't know I had. She died just as dawn was breaking, her hand still in mine, her face peaceful in a way it hadn't been for years. I sat with her a while longer, then called Robert again. This time he answered. She's gone, I said simply. I'll get the first flight back, he replied, his voice thick with what sounded like genuine grief. For a moment I felt sorry for him. Sorry that he had missed these last years with his mother. Sorry that he had chosen distance over presence. The funeral was held 3 days later. A small affair at the Episcopal Church Eleanor had attended all her life. Robert stood beside me, accepting condolences from the handful of friends and relatives who attended. Many of them I was meeting for the first time, cousins and old friends who had never once visited Eleanor during her illness. You're a saint, one elderly woman told me, clasping my hand. Eleanor was so fortunate to have you. Robert too. I smiled politely, saying nothing. Saint was not the word I would have chosen for myself. After the service, Mr. Hoffman approached us. The reading of the will is scheduled for tomorrow at my office, if that's convenient. Robert nodded. 10 o'clock. 10 is fine, Hoffman confirmed, then turned to me. Sarah, I'll need you there as well, of course. Of course, I echoed, noting the slight frown that crossed Robert's face. That night, as we prepared for bed in the quiet house that had been the center of my world for 12 years, Robert finally asked the question I had been waiting for. Why did you move Mom to that facility without discussing it with me first? I looked at him, this man I had once loved, now almost a stranger to me. Because she needed it, and because we could afford it. I told you her money was. Don't, I interrupted sharply. Don't lie to me again, Robert. I know about the money. I know there were no complicated trusts. I know you deliberately kept me from accessing funds that were meant for her care. He stared at me, his expression hardening. You went behind my back to her lawyer? I went looking for the truth, I corrected. Something you should have given me years ago. He turned away, his shoulders tight. You don't understand. That money. It's been in our family for generations. I was protecting our future. No, I said quietly. You were protecting your future. My expense. And at your mother's. We slept in separate rooms that night, the gulf between us finally acknowledged and unbridgeable. The next morning we drove to Hoffman's office in silence. The wood-paneled conference room felt too warm, too close. Robert sat stiffly beside me, his eyes fixed on the papers Hoffman was arranging on the table. Before I begin, Hoffman said, adjusting his glasses, I want to express my personal condolences to both of you. Eleanor was a remarkable woman, and her loss is deeply felt. He cleared his throat. Now to the matter at hand. Eleanor's last will and testament, revised and signed 4 years ago, when she was still legally competent to make such decisions. I sat very still, my hands folded in my lap. 4 years ago would have been around the time I discovered the letters, when I first visited Hoffman and learned the truth about Eleanor's finances. The will is quite straightforward, Hoffman continued. After specific bequests to the church and to her favorite charities, the bulk of Eleanor's estate, including the house in Wellesley, her investments and all personal property not otherwise designated, is to pass to her daughter-in-law, Sarah Mitchell. The room went silent. I felt Robert stiffen beside me. What did you say? He asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Hoffman looked at him steadily. Your mother has left her estate to Sarah. There is a letter explaining her decision, which I am to give to both of you. He slid a sealed envelope across the table. She asked that you read it together. Robert didn't move, so I reached for the envelope. My hands were trembling slightly as I broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. Dear Robert and Sarah, I read aloud, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. If you are reading this, then I have finally found peace after what I know has been a long and difficult journey for both of you, but especially for Sarah. I continued reading Eleanor's letter, my voice gaining strength with each word. I know what you're both thinking. Robert, you're shocked and perhaps angry. Sarah, you're confused. Let me explain my decision. Robert, my beloved son, I've watched over the years as you've built your career, your success becoming the center of your life. I understand ambition, your father had it too, but he never let it consume him the way you have. When you married Sarah, I hoped she would help you find balance. Instead, you used her kindness as a tool to further your own goals, leaving her to shoulder a burden that should have been shared. Yes, I knew what you were doing. Even as my mind began to fail, I had moments of clarity. I saw how rarely you visited. I heard Sarah on the phone with you, begging for help that never came. I knew you were lying about the money that was meant for my care, not hoarded for your inheritance. Sarah, you have been more than a daughter to me. You sacrificed your career, your friendships, your youth to care for an old woman who often couldn't remember your name. You did this with grace and kindness, even when it would have been easier to walk away. You found me proper care when my needs became too great for one person to manage. You read to me, sang to me, treated me with dignity when my own body betrayed me. This is not charity, Sarah. You have earned every penny through years of selfless service. It is payment long overdue, and it comes with my eternal gratitude and love. Robert, I leave you your father's watch and the knowledge that you have a wife whose worth far exceeds any material inheritance. I hope you recognize this before it's too late. With all my love, Eleanor Mitchell. The silence that followed was absolute. I carefully folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope, my mind struggling to process what I just read. Robert sat motionless beside me, his face drained of color. Mr. Hoffman cleared his throat. There are, of course, additional details to discuss. The estate is valued at approximately $7 million, including the house, which alone is worth just over $2 million in today's market. $7 million. The number hung in the air between us. This is ridiculous, Robert finally said, his voice tight with anger. She wasn't in her right mind. I'll contest it. Hoffman's expression remained neutral, but I detected a hint of satisfaction in his eyes. You're welcome to try, of course. However, as I mentioned, your mother made these changes 4 years ago, when she was still legally competent. I personally verified her competency, as did her physician. The will is quite solid. She was manipulated, Robert insisted, shooting me an accusatory glance. By whom? Hoffman asked mildly. Sarah? Who, according to all accounts, including my own observations, devoted 12 years of her life to your mother's care while you were largely absent. He shuffled his papers. I should also mention that your mother kept detailed records of her conversations with you regarding her finances. Most illuminating. Robert's face flushed. What are you talking about? Voice recordings, Hoffman said. Eleanor began recording your phone calls about 8 years ago, when she first suspected you were being less than truthful about her money. They're quite damning, Robert. I've heard them myself. I stared at Hoffman in shock. Eleanor had never mentioned recordings to me. Despite her dementia, she had been more aware than any of us realized. She wouldn't, Robert whispered. She did, Hoffman replied. And she instructed me to use them if necessary to defend her wishes. He looked at me. I don't think that will be necessary, will it, Robert? My husband, though that word felt hollow now, slumped in his chair. This is insane, he muttered. But the fight had gone out of his voice. We left Hoffman's office separately. Robert said he needed to walk to think. I drove home alone, the weight of the morning's revelations pressing on my chest. $7 million. Freedom. Justice. All the things I had stopped allowing myself to dream about years ago. When I pulled into the driveway of Eleanor's. My house, I sat in the car for several minutes, staring at the familiar facade. So many memories lived within those walls, both painful and precious. I thought of Eleanor in her final years, her mind fractured but her heart somehow intact, seeing the truth even when those around her tried to hide it. I went inside and walked from room to room, seeing the space with new eyes. No longer a prison of obligation but a gift. A new beginning. Robert didn't return until evening. I was sitting in Eleanor's study, the one room that had remained mostly untouched during her illness, when I heard his key in the lock. His footsteps were heavy as he made his way to the doorway where he stood, watching me. We need to talk, he said. I nodded, gesturing to the chair opposite mine. Yes, we do. He sat down, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache despite everything. I don't even know where to begin. The truth would be a good start, I suggested quietly. He let out a long breath. The truth. Okay. He met my eyes. I lied about the money. From the beginning. I told myself it was for good reasons, preserving my mother's estate, ensuring our future. But really, he paused, looking away. Really, I think I just didn't want to spend it. It felt like admitting she was never going to get better. That doesn't explain why you left me to handle everything alone, I said, keeping my voice level despite the anger simmering beneath. No, it doesn't. He looked down at his hands. The truth is, I couldn't bear to see her like that. My mother was always so strong, so put together. Watching her disappear bit by bit. I couldn't face it. So I ran. I buried myself in work, told myself I was providing for us financially while you cared for her emotionally. He looked up, his eyes hollow. It was cowardice, pure and simple. Yes, I agreed. It was. He flinched at my bluntness. I'm sorry, Sarah. I know that doesn't begin to cover it, but I am sorry. For all of it. I studied him, this man I had once loved enough to sacrifice everything for. There was genuine remorse in his face, but it came far too late. What happens now? He asked after a long silence. Now, I said slowly, we go our separate ways. He nodded, not looking surprised. You want a divorce? Yes. And the money? The house. The house is mine now, I reminded him. The money too. But I'm not vindictive, Robert. I'll make sure you have enough to start over. After that, we're done. He studied me with new eyes, perhaps seeing for the first time the strength that had developed in me over the years of caregiving. You've changed. I've grown up, I corrected. I've learned what I'm worth. That night, I slept in the master bedroom for the first time. Robert took the guest room without complaint. In the morning, he packed a suitcase and left, promising to have his lawyer contact mine regarding the divorce. There were no dramatic goodbyes, no tears. Just the quiet closing of a chapter that had gone on far too long. The weeks that followed were surreal. I met with financial advisors, learning about investments and trusts and all the things that had been kept from me for so long. I contacted a realtor, not to sell the house, not yet, but to understand its value in the current market. I reconnected with old colleagues from my physical therapy days, testing the waters of a possible return to my profession. Through it all, I felt Eleanor's presence, not in a ghostly way, but in the legacy she had left me. Not just money but a chance to reclaim myself. One afternoon, about a month after the funeral, I received an unexpected visitor. The doorbell rang as I was sorting through Eleanor's closet, deciding what to donate and what to keep. When I opened the door, an elderly man with kind eyes and silver hair stood on the porch, clutching a bouquet of lilies, Eleanor's favorite. "Sarah Mitchell?" he asked, his voice surprisingly strong for a man who must have been in his 80s. "Yes," I replied, curiosity piqued. "My name is Thomas Brennan." He hesitated. I was a friend of Eleanor's. A very dear friend. My heart skipped. "Thomas, the man from the letters. Please come in," I said, stepping aside. He followed me to the living room, his eyes moving over the familiar surroundings with a mixture of sadness and nostalgia. "It's been many years since I was last in this house," he said quietly. I offered him tea, which he accepted gratefully. As I prepared it in the kitchen, my mind raced with questions. This was the man Eleanor had loved, perhaps even more than her husband. The man she had given up to protect Robert's inheritance. The very inheritance she had ultimately given to me. When I returned with the tea, Thomas was looking at a photograph of Eleanor from her younger days, displayed on the mantel. "She was beautiful," I said, setting down the tray. "Always," he agreed. "Inside and out." He turned to me. "I read about her passing in the paper. I wanted to attend the funeral but—" He trailed off. "You weren't sure if you'd be welcome," I finished for him. He nodded. Eleanor and I had a complicated history. She ended our relationship just before her diagnosis. Said she needed to focus on family matters. A sad smile crossed his face. "I never stopped loving her though. All these years." I hesitated, then made a decision. "I found your letters," I admitted. "After Eleanor's diagnosis worsened. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for documents and I found the box." Instead of being angry or embarrassed, Thomas looked relieved. "Then you know. About us. I know you loved each other for a very long time. 52 years. He said softly. "We met when she was just 20, already engaged to James. It was immediate, our connection. But she was honorable. She married James as planned, and I kept my distance. After his death, we found each other again." His eyes grew distant with memory. "We had 15 good years together before she ended things." "Why did she?" I asked, though I thought I knew the answer. "She said she was concerned about her son's inheritance. That she needed to put her affairs in order." He shook his head. "I told her it didn't matter to me, the money, the house. I would have lived with her in a one-room apartment if that's what it took. But Eleanor was always proper, always concerned about doing the right thing." I thought about Eleanor's decision to leave everything to me. A decision that, according to Hoffman, she had made 4 years ago. Around the same time she had ended things with Thomas. "Did you know about her condition?" I asked gently. He nodded, eyes filling with tears. "Not at first. She kept it from me. But I suspected something was wrong. She would forget conversations we'd had, appointments we'd made. When she finally told me, I begged her to let me help, to let me be there for her. She refused." He looked at me directly. "That's why I came today. To thank you for doing what I couldn't. Being there for her until the end." "How did you know I was the one who cared for her?" "Eleanor wrote to me just once about 3 years ago. A brief note saying she was being well looked after by her daughter-in-law Sarah. That she had never had a daughter, but if she had, she would have wanted one just like you. Tears pricked my eyes. Even in the midst of her decline, Eleanor had thought to reassure the man who loved her. She left me everything, I said suddenly, not sure why I was telling him this. Her money, the house. All of it. Thomas smiled. Good. She chose well. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small worn box. I brought this for you. Eleanor gave it to me many years ago, but I think she would want you to have it now. I opened the box to find a delicate silver locket. Inside was a tiny photograph of Eleanor as a young woman, laughing at the camera. That's how I remember her, Thomas said softly, full of life and joy. Thank you, I whispered, closing the locket carefully. Would you like to stay for dinner? I'd love to hear more about Eleanor, the Eleanor you knew. He smiled, and in that moment I saw a glimpse of what Eleanor must have seen in him all those years ago. I'd like that very much. Thomas stayed for hours, sharing stories about a side of Eleanor I had never known, the young woman who had dreamed of traveling the world, who had once snuck into a jazz club in the 1950s, who had written poetry that she never showed to anyone but him. In his stories, Eleanor came alive again, not as the confused, frail woman I had cared for, but as a vibrant, complex human being who had lived a life full of both joy and compromise. When he finally left, promising to keep in touch, I felt as if I had been given yet another gift, the gift of knowing Eleanor more fully. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly straightforward. Robert, perhaps out of guilt or simply exhaustion, didn't contest anything. I was generous in the settlement, providing him with enough to start over without having to worry about finances immediately. He sent me a brief note afterward. You're a better person than I deserve. I'm sorry for everything. I hope you find happiness, Sarah. I didn't respond. Some chapters are better left closed. With the divorce finalized and my financial future secure, I faced the question that had been hovering at the edges of my consciousness. What now? What did I want after so many years of putting my own desires aside? The answer came gradually, as I reconnected with my old self and discovered the new woman I had become through years of caregiving. I decided to sell the Wellesley house, not because I couldn't afford to keep it, but because it held too many memories, both bitter and sweet. I wanted a fresh start. I purchased a smaller home closer to Boston and used part of my inheritance to establish a foundation focused on supporting caregivers of dementia patients, providing respite care, financial assistance, and emotional support. I named it the Eleanor Mitchell Foundation, in honor of the woman whose suffering had given birth to this new purpose. I also returned to physical therapy, not full-time, but enough to reconnect with the profession I had once loved. My experiences with Eleanor had given me a new perspective on patient care, particularly for the elderly and those with cognitive impairments. Thomas became a dear friend, visiting often to help with the foundation. His insights into Eleanor's personality shaped our approach, ensuring that our work reflected her values of dignity and independence. Sometimes, when we worked late into the evening, he would share more stories of their time together, each one a thread connecting me to the woman whose life had so dramatically altered my own. A year after Eleanor's death, I received a package in the mail. It was from Robert, postmarked from Singapore, where he had relocated after our divorce. Inside was a leather-bound journal with a note attached. Found this in my old office. Thought you should have it. R. The journal was Eleanor's, dating back to the early years of her marriage. As I read through the carefully penned entries, I discovered a woman wrestling with societal expectations, passionate love, and the deep bond of motherhood. She wrote of her affair with Thomas with both guilt and defiance, of her determination to give Robert the stable home she believed he needed, of her gradual recognition that her son had grown into a man very different from what she had hoped. The final entry was dated just weeks before her diagnosis, as if she had sensed the coming darkness and needed to put her thoughts in order. I have lived two lives, the one expected of me and the one my heart desired. I have loved two men, one with the blessing of society, one without. I have no regrets about either. But as I feel my mind beginning to slip, I worry about what will become of the life I've built. Robert is so consumed with his career, so distant. And now he's married Sarah, a kind soul who deserves better than to be abandoned with a deteriorating old woman. I fear that is exactly what will happen. If my suspicions about my health are correct, decisions must be made. The money that James worked so hard to accumulate and that I've carefully managed all these years, who should it go to? Robert, who already has more than he needs and values it above human connection. Or could it serve a better purpose? Thomas wants me to marry him, to spend whatever time I have left in the open relationship we've been denied for decades. I am tempted, God, how I am tempted. But if my mind is truly failing, I cannot burden him with my care. And I cannot leave Robert with the shock of a new marriage and a changed will in my final coherent act as his mother. So I will end things with Thomas, giving him the freedom to remember me as I was. And I will watch Robert carefully in the coming months. His response to my condition will tell me everything I need to know about where my legacy should go. I closed the journal, understanding at last the full complexity of Eleanor's decision. She had tested Robert, hoping he would rise to the occasion, prove himself worthy of both her love and her inheritance. Instead, he had failed spectacularly, revealing a selfishness that could not be excused by ambition or fear. And I had passed a test I hadn't known I was taking. 5 years have passed since Eleanor's death. The foundation is thriving, having helped hundreds of families navigate the challenges of dementia care. I've remarried a kind, dedicated neurologist I met through my foundation work, who understands the value of presence, of showing up day after day for those who need you. Robert and I maintain minimal contact, exchanging brief emails on birthdays and holidays. He seems to have found some peace in his new life abroad, though I doubt he will ever fully understand what he lost through his choices. Thomas passed away last winter, peacefully in his sleep. He left me his collection of letters from Eleanor, along with a note thanking me for bringing him back into the orbit of her life, even after she was gone. At his funeral I placed a single lily, Eleanor's favorite, on his casket, a final connection between two people who had loved each other across decades of separation. Sometimes in quiet moments I think about the strange journey that brought me here, from a young physical therapist with dreams of my own practice to a caregiver forced to put those dreams aside, to now a woman with resources, purpose, and hard-won wisdom. I think about Eleanor, who saw in me something I hadn't yet recognized in myself. Resilience, compassion, strength. I wear her mother's pearl earrings often, and around my neck always, I wear the silver locket Thomas gave me, with Eleanor's laughing face inside. Reminders of the unexpected inheritance that transformed my life. Not just the money, though, that brought freedom, but the deeper legacy of a woman who, in her final act of clarity, chose to reward kindness over obligation, presence over absence. I never thought I'd become rich from being kind. That's not why I did it. But in the end, kindness brought me wealth beyond measure. Not just in dollars but in purpose, in friendship, in the knowledge that even in her diminished state, Eleanor saw me clearly when others did not. And that, perhaps, is the greatest inheritance of all. So that's my story, I say, looking around at the circle of faces watching me intently. This monthly support group for dementia caregivers has become an important part of my foundation's work. A safe space for sharing both the hardships and unexpected blessings of the caregiving journey. You were so patient, one woman says, wiping away tears. 12 years. I'm struggling after just 2. I reach across and squeeze her hand. You're doing the hardest job there is. And you're not alone. Did you ever regret it? Asks a man whose wife was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's last year. All those years, the career you gave up? I consider his question carefully. I regret that I didn't demand help sooner. I regret accepting Robert's lies about the finances. But caring for Eleanor? No. Even in the darkest moments, there was something sacred in that work. I look around the circle. What you're all doing, it matters. Even when it feels like no one sees, it matters. After the meeting, as I gather my things to leave, the coordinator approaches me. Would you consider speaking at our regional conference next month? Your story gives people hope. I smile, thinking of the journal now displayed in the foundation's main office, open to Eleanor's final entry. A reminder of the woman whose life became so entwined with my own. I'd be honored, I tell her. After all, sharing our stories is how we find our way forward, isn't it? How we transform our struggles into something meaningful. As I drive home through the autumn evening, golden leaves swirling in my headlights, I feel Eleanor's presence beside me, not as the fragile, confused woman of her final years, but as the clear-eyed, determined woman who saw the truth when others looked away, who rewarded kindness when she could have chosen resentment, who taught me through her life and death that sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't what's left to you, but what's awakened within you. And for that I will be forever grateful.